My stoic husband from our arranged marriage has been acting weird lately. He's become clingy and talkative. He purrs whenever I touch him, and his body temperature is surprisingly hot. Even our weekly routine has become an energetic, insatiable affair. After another session that left me seeing stars and nearly passing out, I decided to delicately suggest we revise our agreement. Unexpectedly, his eyes suddenly turned red. They went wide, as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. The next second, a pair of fluffy cat ears popped out in his emotional state. He started crying like a boiling kettle. Human, so when you said you liked your kitty and would do anything for your kitty, were you lying? In our minimalist, low-key bedroom, I stared blankly at the ceiling. Tired. So tired. I knew I shouldn't have skipped that boring flower arrangement class to be lazy. I quietly grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and peeked at myself. The sight was alarming. My lips were swollen and a ravishing red. Combined with the tear tracks at the corners of my eyes, I looked like a ripe peach that had been bruised, just waiting for someone to come back and mercilessly pluck it again and again. What are you looking at? A hand snatched my phone and ruthlessly sent it away, restoring our private world. Then, it traveled down to my waist. His palm was shockingly hot. I tried to lift my leg slightly, and my face instantly twisted into a pained grimace. A searing pain climbed up from my inner thigh. This week, we've already gone over our quota, I reminded him. Alex said nothing, just kept purring. His scrutinizing eyes, deep and dark, seemed to narrow slowly in the light. What? Was he mad? Alex had always been a man of his word, cold, proud, and reserved. After we got married, we agreed to keep things professional, twice a week. He was the one breaking the contract first. But under his cold, unyielding gaze, my confidence withered. What could I do? I was the one who married up, the most disappointing real heiress. The only reason I was brought back to my family was to be a pawn in the marriage alliance between the Jiang and Liu families. I cautiously laid back down, surrendering. Alex's gaze darkened further. As his hot, greedy, and earnest eyes scanned over me, I felt a shiver run through my body, as if I were being scraped by the barbed tongue of some large predator. The beast was restless. I shot up like a spring. No. I really can't do this anymore. With my last ounce of defiance, I pushed him away. Honey, I need to. Before he could narrow his eyes and radiate an even more dangerous aura, I forced my voice into a high pitch, go to the bathroom. I sat on the smart toilet and let out a long breath. I closed my eyes. I couldn't tell if I had fallen asleep or passed on to the next life. This couldn't go on. I had to figure out a way to survive this. But I had no experience with relationships. How do you say something like this gracefully? I mulled it over, then unlocked my phone and opened up Reddit. The welcome back screen, along with my profile picture, made me pause. I instinctively swiped past it. Then, I couldn't help but switch back to my profile and stare at the avatar. It was a very majestic-looking kitten. Even though the background was the old tenement building from my childhood, which in my memory was perpetually grimy, every single soft hair on that kitten declared its extraordinariness. Its fluffy, golden, round face was held high, possessing a human-like, world-despising grace. A pair of round eyes stared furtively at the person taking the picture, their gaze burning. After being caught, it flattened its ears and quickly looked away. A tide of sorrow washed over me. I wonder if Comet is doing okay in kitty heaven. Alex coughed twice from outside the door. I jolted back to reality. After a few seconds of hesitation, I posted my question using this account. Survival comes first. Comet is a kitty, urgent. My husband and I have an arranged marriage. He's always been very cold and disciplined, very by the book, which I was fine with. But lately, he's gotten weird. He's clingy, purrs when I touch him, his body temperature is higher than normal, and when we get down to it, he has no self-control. It's always high heat, full blast. I'm about to get burned to a crisp. How can I delicately bring this up with him? The internet works fast these days. The post blew up in minutes. Except, why was the vibe so weird? What can you do? It's springtime. Time to take him to the vet and get him snipped. Alas. Maiden, what is thy age? Didst thou not know the ways of the world? Surely thou didst prepare a dowry of delectable canned foods to soothe him in this time of need? How can a cat purr constantly? LOL, this is hilarious. With that profile pic, I can't tell if the OP is a troll or just being weird. Does anyone really call their cat their husband? Who cares, that's not important. You have to answer my question. Is that your husband in the profile pic? Your husband could be a child model. Your husband could be a child model. I was completely baffled. They seemed to think Alex was a cat. But I was clearly describing a person. I replied to them one by one, it's my husband, not a cat. The OP is so deep in her role-playing script she's lost all touch with reality. What kind of person acts like a cat in heat during the spring? Honestly, if you ignore the OP's bizarre description and assume she's telling the truth, it's actually a good thing. I was full of question marks. Why? The person replied quickly, cherish it while he's still a raging fire. After 25, all men want to do is talk. I really don't have time to mess around with you all. The comments section was pure chaos. I even had to delete an ad for some kind of male enhancement pill. My DMs were an even bigger mess. Wait. There was one strange DM that wasn't mocking me. Turns out I'm a CEO, so you find it troubling. Maybe it just can't control its instincts when it's around something it likes. I almost choked. I angrily typed back a reply, I'm not a female cat. Then, I did a speed run of blocking him, deleting the post, and getting out of there. Fueled by a sudden surge of spite, I opened Alex's contact info. I edited it, Alex. A little cat paw emoji now followed Alex's name. It was hard to imagine the formidable CEO Alex being associated with this cute little emoji. It was just so adorably out of character. I let out a cackle. But the next second, my laughter died in my throat. The newly edited contact name popped up on my screen, scaring me half to death. Had Alex developed psychic powers? I cautiously answered the call. Not done yet? Alex paused, his voice low and, for some reason, a bit stiff and unsteady, as if trying to hide something. I'm waiting for you in the bedroom. I forced myself to walk into the bedroom. Good news, he was fully dressed, his collar buttoned up to the very top in that abstinent way of his. Bad news, he was taking up the entire bed, leaving me nowhere to sit but on the very edge, tentatively scooting over. What's wrong? Honey, are you in a rush? Alex stared straight at me, his expression dark and flickering with a sense of having seen through everything. After a long moment, he exhaled through his nose and slowly made some room for me. He reached out his hand. Just moments ago, this hand was gripping my waist, its fingerprints pressed deep into my skin. Now, this hand sank into the soft sheets, layered with several silk cloths, and scratched them rapidly a few times. I looked at Alex in shock. He noticed my gaze and snatched his hand back with a whoosh. Alex calmly clasped his hands together, then flipped the blanket open and closed it again. After tidying up for a moment, he nonchalantly patted the bed, his face a mask of composure. No. I thought about it, and I've been too hard on you these past few days. You don't have to hide from me. I blinked slowly. Alex was capable of self-reflection and compassion. Anyone who knew him would know this was out of character. Anyone who didn't might think he'd just finished reading my complaint on Reddit. With a strange feeling, I obediently slid into bed. Alex made a tisk sound, looking down at a rebellious strand of hair on my head. His voice was very low, a mumble, like a sigh or a long-suppressed grievance. You used to say I was your baby and you'd listen to everything I said, but you don't even recognize me, and you're not willing to feed me until I'm full. I didn't hear him clearly. I only caught the word baby. I glanced up at Alex secretly. What did you say, honey? I must have misheard. Alex turned his head away and went completely silent. Then, he coolly wrapped his arm around me, pulling me into his embrace. The force was incredible. I was treated to an unsolicited face full of his chest. So tight. I couldn't breathe. Go to sleep, Alex said, sparing his words. The steady rhythm of his breathing soon came from his stomach pressed against mine. Maybe it was my imagination, but this warm, slightly fuzzy feeling was like burying my head in a cat's belly, a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time. The curtains were drawn tight. By a faint sliver of light, I greedily traced Alex's silhouette in the darkness. I pressed a hand to my chest. It's okay. I managed to suppress the inappropriate, reckless flutter of my heart that was sparked by that one mumbled word, baby. Alex was a man of his word, rational and reliable. He did what he said he would and gave me a break. For the next few days, he left early and came home late, working overtime at the office. After finally getting a few good nights of sleep, the cursed alarm clock rang. Alex was already at the company. I glanced at the time. It was only 7. Some of these wealthy wives and socialites are so inconsiderate. Why do I have to be up at 8 a.m.? Like a college student? I sleepwalked to my destination, arriving on time. Just as my butt warmed the seat, my soul still wandering, someone yanked me back to reality. I focused my eyes. What was she doing here? Janice Jiang. The fake heiress, switched at birth, my sister with no blood relation. Yet, my so-called parents treated her like their real daughter, the true heiress. They said the Jiang family had 2 true heiresses. Yes. I was the clown of the Jiang family. Even though I was so ostracized, Janice still couldn't stand me. She was petty, and now she was staring at my dark circles with unconcealed amazement. Stella, you're married into the Liu family now. Why do you still look so haggard? Don't tell me Alex won't even give you pocket money for anti-aging treatments in Switzerland? I guess he really only married you because of what that spiritual master said. He's not interested in you at all, is he? Even as she tried to control her tone, the acidic envy seeped through. Her best friend winked at her. Oh, my boyfriend is different. He's so clingy. This morning, he just wouldn't let me go. The friend blushed appropriately. Oh, I shouldn't say any more. I forgot we have someone here who married the great Alex Liu, famous for being cold and ascetic. Janice played along. You can't say that. Everyone has desires. Maybe he just hasn't met the right person. Right, sister, he hasn't touched you even once, has he? No way, right? No way. I sipped my tea, going along with their rhythm. Emicham, he's ascetic. You two sound so sure. Were you hiding under our bed? Pfft. Someone couldn't hold it in and sprayed their tea. Janice's face fell instantly. Her face was ashen. Sister, why are you still so stubborn and ill-mannered? Mom and Dad signed you up for so many classes to make you look like a proper lady. You're just wasting their efforts. Look at you, so plain. I find it hard to understand, why did Alex choose you back then? It was true. I really wasn't anything special. I had the looks, but none of the refinement. Back then, Alex was the type to have countless high-quality options and not even bother to look at them. So why did he pick me out of the crowd? I chewed on the small cake in my mouth. For some reason, what should have been sweet tasted a bit sour. Maybe it was the layer of blueberries on top. Such a rule-abiding fruit. Small, round, inconspicuous, never crossing the line. In the 2 years I'd been married to Alex, I had heard too many sour remarks. Especially from Janice. She had argued so vehemently back then, since they were switched at birth, their birth dates were similar, so why on earth wouldn't Alex choose her? I tilted my head, deliberately playing innocent to annoy her. You'll have to ask him that. Janice was so angry she nearly fell over. Fortunately, the wives and ladies of the upper class valued decorum. A few jokes later, the little incident was bypassed, and the topic changed. They started discussing how philanthropy was the latest trend and they should do some charity work. At times like these, I had even less to contribute. They all looked down on my background to some extent. They always subtly excluded me. I could only bury my head in my food. Until Janice spoke up again, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Sister, I heard from Mom and Dad that before you came back to the Jiang family, you grew up in the tenements in the old city. There must be a lot of poor people there, right? How pitiful. Why don't we organize a donation of our second-hand clothes? We only wear them once anyway. Poor people like that who have never seen nice things won't mind." "Stella, what are you doing?" Janice shrieked in anger and dismay, lifting her skirt to stare at the cream stain on it. I was expressionless. My hand slipped. "You." "Me what?" I put the plate down. "I have no manners, so I'll be blunt. What kind of charity game are you trying to play? Who do you think you are, some god bestowing favor upon others? Don't be ridiculous. They don't need clothes that fall apart after one wash, they need actual money. Ordinary people's homes are not your personal testing ground for showing off your wealth. Stop acting like a privileged brat with a condescending attitude, okay? If only I had money back then, if only I were rich like them." I lowered my gaze, tucking away all my thoughts. I had never lost my temper so pointedly before. I felt nothing but rage at the shallow charity games of these wealthy women. The entire room was silent. After a long moment, the chatter resumed. But no one spoke to me anymore. They covered their mouths and giggled. They whispered cuttingly, "She came from the slums. Of course she has no manners. She acts like she can walk all over everyone just because she's Mrs. Liu. Does she really think she's a phoenix now? Just wait. Mr. Liu will get tired of her sooner or later." I shrugged. I picked up my fork and took another piece of cake. An incoming voice call rang out at the worst possible time. "Whose phone is ringing?" I slowly looked down. "Alex is inviting you to a voice call. Accept." Alex's voice was deep and powerful, with an almost imperceptible hoarseness and restraint. "Where did you go? Why aren't you home?" The people around me held their breath. I couldn't quite describe the feeling in my heart. It wasn't the satisfaction of a quick comeback to "he doesn't care about you at all." It was a sudden sense of grievance. I didn't even realize my own voice was tinged with it. "At a tea party." Alex paused. I felt a little uneasy. After all, these annoying, pretentious women were, in one way or another, connected to Alex through family business. What would Alex say? Would he think I was ungrateful and couldn't even handle something so trivial? Didn't I tell you that if you don't like dealing with them, you don't have to worry about my feelings? You don't need to do things you don't like or go to places you don't want to go just to maintain relationships for me. Alex said, "Come home. You're my wife. Anyone who gives you a hard time is picking a fight with me, and with the Liu family." Janice's face turned green. And not just hers. Everyone at the table looked uncomfortable, yet they looked at me with fawning expressions. Someone started to say, falteringly, "Mr. Liu, you've misunderstood. We get along very well with Stella." The voice call was abruptly ended. I picked up my bag and stuffed the last bite of cake into my mouth. Well, I guess I won't be coming back then. It wasn't until I was in the car on my way home that the cream in my throat seemed to finally melt. It left a sweet blockage that made my heart beat abnormally. From the tenements to the Jiang family, and then to the Liu family, I had always been like a floating duckweed. The tenements were gray. The Jiang house was cold. Alex was aloof. I never dared to let my mind wander. But Alex. Why did he seem like a completely different person all of a sudden? A notification on my phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. "Alex, not home yet? Hit rush hour, there's some traffic." I thought for a moment, then sent a sticker, cat_scurrying. It was the same chubby, milky white Comet from before, waddling towards me with his little short legs, looking like a furry caterpillar. The phone screen lit up. "Alex is inviting you to a call." I answered. His first sentence, "That cat's legs are too short. Find a picture of an adult cat. Their legs are very long when they're grown up." His second sentence, "No other reason, I'm just saying that adult cats have very long legs." His third sentence came with a sense of urgency and suppression. I could almost feel his hot breath through the phone. Alex's voice dropped, sounding vulnerable. "I'm not trying to rush you. I was too embarrassed to say it before, but the reason I want you to come back is because I can't hold it in anymore. I feel awful. I miss you." He even sounded a little cautious. "You're not mad at me, are you?" I held the phone, stunned. I clearly heard my own heart give two hard, unruly thumps. I forgot everything, my mind a complete blank. I just kept agreeing. "No, why would I be mad at you?" The moment I walked through the door, Alex pinned me against it. His whole body was burning up. Hotter than the past few days. Abnormally so. Perhaps the fever made him crave water. An overwhelming barrage of kisses, so dense our breaths became thick and sticky. Alex tasted me over and over, tirelessly. My head was dizzy, like a fish gasping for air, held down by a cat's paw, unable to move. Strange. Why would I have such a thought? It must be those unreliable netizens. Before I could grasp that fleeting thought, I was forced onto my tiptoes. Alex seemed to notice my exhaustion. He put his hands on my waist and half lifted me up. Just like that, we were pressed even closer. I struggled to catch my breath. "Shouldn't you go see a doctor?" Alex didn't answer. He just stared at me, still purring. He buried his head in the crook of my neck and took a deep breath. As if that wasn't enough, he took my hand and unconsciously placed it on his cheek. Then, he gently rubbed against it. The purring grew louder. He couldn't help but murmur, "No. This is enough." My heart pounded even harder. I spoke cautiously, but my hand boldly stroked his soft, thick, silk-like hair. "To the bedroom?" Alex looked up. He blinked slowly, very slowly, as if trying to express something. He said, "You initiated this." Alex scooped me up into his arms with one hand. "I'm not the one forcing you with our agreement, you initiated this." He repeated himself. Like he was fixated on it. And for some reason, he was excited about it. I wrapped my arms around his neck. "Yes, I initiated this." The curtains were drawn. The lights were turned off. Alex leaned against the headboard like a big, satisfied cat. I, on the other hand, had zoned out again, entering a state of post-coital clarity. Don't ask. If you ask, the answer is regret. Deep regret. As I was regretting it, I also felt that it was different from before. So strange. I was just as tired. So why did I feel so satisfied, so content? Before I could sort out my thoughts, Alex spoke first. He looked down, his eyelashes trembling slightly. "Were you worried about me just now?" Alex paused. He didn't seem very good at saying things like this. The words turned over on his tongue a few times before he finally managed to get them out. "I'm very happy." His voice was as soft as a feather, gently tickling me. I looked at Alex in disbelief. He hadn't had time to wipe the smile from his lips. So he was human after all. A living, breathing, flesh and blood person. When he wasn't putting on his cold facade, when he shed the sharp edges of his decisive, alpha male persona, he was actually incredibly handsome. So handsome he was almost adorable. When his cat-like eyes blinked, even his dark gaze seemed much softer. I stared at Alex. Why was he acting like this? Should I respond? Hesitantly, I took a small step out of the world of my tenement building past. It's what I should do. And besides, I'm the one who should be sorry. I've been thinking about it these past few days. I've never been in a relationship before, so I didn't know that men, in these matters, anyway, I didn't realize I was making you hold back so much. You were so pent up you were burning up. That must have been awful, right? Alex scratched the blanket. He averted his eyes unnaturally. It's not your fault. It's also because I'm not used to expressing myself. I suddenly felt that Alex wasn't so high and mighty on his pedestal after all. I actively climbed onto his chest, listening to his strong heartbeat. Faster and faster. He held me and let out a long breath, as if he had made up his mind about something. There's something I want to tell you. I originally thought you should figure it out on your own, otherwise, there's no point in saying it. Do you still remember Co? A loud ringtone blared. I embarrassingly answered the phone, regretting for a moment that I'd set both my alarm and my ringtone to the upbeat. If I were a DJ, would you love me? For convenience. Janice took a deep breath on the other end. Are you going to answer your phone or not? You think I wanted to be the one to call you? Stella, I went to the tea party today to tell you that the Lantern Festival is coming up. Dad wants you to come home for a reunion dinner. Dad also said you didn't even come back for New Year's. If you don't come back for the Lantern Festival, you can just stay away from the Jiang family for the rest of your life. I hung up the phone and stood there dazed for a moment. After a while, I asked Alex, what were you asking me if I remembered? Alex pressed his lips together, turned his back to me in frustration, and said sourly, I didn't say anything. It seemed that ill-timed phone call had ruined his mood. I hung my head and said nothing. The atmosphere became tense and frozen. Alex suddenly asked, are you really going to go? For some reason, the handsome Alex from a moment ago seemed like a fleeting illusion. He vanished with a poke. His expression was awful right now, and his tone was foul. I started wringing my hands. They are my parents, after all. The wheel of fate spun before my eyes like a slideshow. Whether it's saving others or saving yourself, this is your lesson to learn. Alex snorted. Oh. He rolled over, his back to me as he went to sleep. Whatever. There are plenty of gifts at home. Tell the butler whatever you need. I poked Alex's back. What? I smiled. Nothing. I just suddenly thought, honey, you're so cute. His only reply was a dismissive humph. I had been married to Alex for a year. But it felt like I had only started to get to know him in the last few days. This strange feeling was like a child flying a kite, watching it soar and glide in the sky, knowing it would always come back to their hand. It even made me feel that going back to the Jiang family wasn't such a terrible thing anymore. I pressed myself against Alex's back. He shivered slightly, then quickly realized my mischief, tensed up, and stopped moving. I whispered, good afternoon. The decor in the Jiang family's villa was already outdated. Even though they had climbed up by marrying their daughter off to the Liu family, they hadn't managed to secure the capital needed to restore their former glory. After all, I had failed to live up to their constant nagging. Whenever they asked me for money or resources, I would just say, what can I do? Who am I to ask for anything? Although the rumors about me would sound terrible, it didn't affect my actual interests. In the past year, through me, my so-called parents had only managed to get some small-time investments from between Alex's fingers. Probably just enough for about 10 round trips to Switzerland for the anti-aging treatments Janice was so obsessed with. The Jiang family must have been getting desperate. I heard that 6 months ago, they even tried to find that spiritual master from before, hoping he could give them some advice or perform a ritual to make the Liu family willingly help them and boost their fortune. Unfortunately, they couldn't find him. The master had vanished into thin air. After all that, they still had to swallow their pride, call me their daughter, and ask me to acknowledge this family. I knocked on the door. The aroma of food filled the house. Janice smiled as she picked up a piece of crystal sashimi, the housekeeper's specialty, and whined coquettishly at my mother, what's wrong with sneaking a bite? I wanted some. Oh, you. Cynthia pampered her with a gentle tap on the nose. No blame. I couldn't help but remember when I first came to this home. I couldn't stand being hungry. So after a long and tiring journey, I eagerly grabbed a small pastry from the table. What did Cynthia say to me then? She was holding a gemstone necklace she was planning to give Janice up to the sunlight, trying to force a polite smile at me, but she couldn't hide her contempt. How did you live in that slum? Is eating all you know? You need to learn some manners from now on. That gemstone necklace was so beautiful. It sparkled brilliantly. The dazzling light it reflected in the sun was so piercing that I never ate another pastry in the Jiang house again. I looked down at the gifts in my hands. Still like an outsider, I said, I'm back. When Cynthia and Henry heard me, they turned their heads, their faces unexpectedly beaming with joy. Stella's back. They swarmed around me, seating me at the table as if they were truly loving parents. We were just waiting for you to start dinner. I glanced at the crystal sashimi. Janice threw her chopsticks down in annoyance. Oh my, Cynthia exclaimed. Stella even brought gifts back. I nodded and handed the gifts to the three of them one by one. For Henry, 2 textured walnuts for hand playing. For Cynthia, a large, high-quality pearl. For Janice, a painting by a famous modern artist. None of them were particularly expensive. I watched them open the presents, unconsciously wringing my hands. Just like how I had chosen to answer Janice's call and come back on the day of the Lantern Festival. I still held on to a tiny sliver of hope that I didn't even want to admit to myself. How thoughtful of you. I watched as the gifts were casually placed back in their boxes and tossed aside. Henry barely glanced at his before closing the box. His face wreathed in smiles, he eagerly cut to the chase. Stella, you rarely come back. Dad has something he wants to discuss with you. I looked at him quietly, then suddenly smiled. Can't it wait until after we eat? Didn't you want me to come back for a reunion dinner? Henry's face darkened after my sarcastic retort. He said, we can eat anytime. What's important is that our family's cash flow is about to break. You've been married to Alex for a year now. It's fine if you couldn't help much before. Mom and Dad understand that Alex isn't an easy person to get along with, and you don't have much say. But this time, you have to help. I studied the expressions on their 3 faces. The next second, I swept the chopsticks next to me to the side with a sharp motion. The chopsticks clattered against the dishes. I get it now, I said. Henry, who was about to lose his temper, looked delighted. The company needs 20 million. I cut him off. I get it now. You 3 are the real family. If you're going to ask for a favor, you should act like it. You people are shameless. You don't even want to let me have a meal, and you still expect me to help you. This favor? I'm not helping. You'd better put on a good show, because I'm afraid I won't just refuse to help, I said with a smile. I might even encourage Alex to kick you while you're down. Henry slammed his hand on the table and stood up. This is rebellion. You're using Alex to threaten your own father? You're my daughter. It's only natural for a daughter to help her family. And don't you forget, I was the one who got you your bank card when I brought you back. You've spent over $1 million on a bunch of poor people in the tenements over the past year, but you won't give a single penny to your own father? I looked at him coldly. Is it also natural to give birth to a child but not raise them? If you think a daughter is so capable, then why don't you ask Janice to help you? Why weren't you willing to marry her off back when you knew Alex was hard to deal with? Oh, I forgot. Alex didn't want her. My bad, I misunderstood. Cynthia looked at me as if I were a monster. How could I have such a heartless daughter? I chuckled. Because I grew up in the tenements, not raised by your own hands. I have no manners. Are you satisfied now, Mom? Cynthia clutched her chest, gasped for air, and actually started to cry. What have I done to deserve this? Janice's eyes were red with anger. Stella, get out. Don't even think about eating a single bite of our food. You're not part of this family. I pounded on my chest, which felt tight with unspoken words. Just as I was about to say who cares, I heard a familiar voice. It was accompanied by a loud crash. You're telling who to get out? Janice stared in disbelief at the door, which had just been kicked in. Alex. The stifling pressure in my chest suddenly lifted. I looked at the newcomer, just as bewildered. What are you doing here? Alex stood silhouetted against the light. His expression was so cold that the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. I rubbed the goosebumps on my arms. It wasn't my imagination. Why did it actually get colder? Alex walked closer, step by step. He looked at the table full of food, cracked his knuckles, and said lightly, "So, you weren't going to let her eat?" Janice bit her lip, the defiant words dying on her tongue. All she heard was another loud crash. Crash. What are you doing? Are you crazy? Alex, no matter how powerful you are, this is still the Jiang family home. Alex retracted the hand that had just flipped the table and calmly wiped it. He sneered. Weren't you going to stop her from eating your family's food? Then no one eats. As for you saying this is the Jiang family home, interesting. Apologize. If the three of you don't apologize to my wife today, I'll have this villa registered under a new name tomorrow. It wasn't a pretentious question or a threat. It was a statement of a reality that could be realized immediately. I stared at Alex, stunned. I often didn't know where the suffocating feeling in my chest came from. I just vaguely called it the grievance and fear of being misunderstood and having no one to rely on. After all, in my life, from the cramped tenements to the Jiang family, it had always been a dim and gloomy path. When I was very young, I used to cling to the old, beat-up public television in the tenements, the one that often showed black and white static and played Journey to the West, and I would dream. Could there be a world-class hero just for me, like the Monkey King, who would come to save me, riding on a 7-colored cloud? As I got older, I stopped dreaming. But the beautiful dreams of my childhood appeared now, so out of place. Alex wasn't riding a 7-colored cloud. But his presence at this moment felt more reliable than any hero. Janice suddenly shrieked, "Make us apologize to her?" Impossible. What did we do wrong? It's all this ungrateful brat's fault. Mom and Dad gave birth to her, brought her back, and spent money to educate her. She's not grateful, and now she wants us to apologize? Alex glanced at his watch. I'm giving you 1 minute to think it over. The ticking of the mechanical watch was faint, but each tick felt like a heavy blow to the heart. Henry looked at me, putting on his stern father act. Stella. I looked at the gifts on the table, opened and then casually tossed aside, gifts that might be given away to the cleaning lady at any moment. My voice was calm. Apologize. From now on, I have nothing to do with any of you. Alex's gaze, which landed on me, finally held some warmth. Time passed, second by second. Janice crossed her arms, clearly not believing what Alex had just said. Stella, you're dreaming, Mom. She clutched her swollen cheek in disbelief, looking at Cynthia. Her mother, who had always doted on her, was no longer gasping for breath, her heart no longer hurt. She could even grit her teeth and say sternly, "Shut up. Apologize to your sister and your brother-in-law." Janice turned to Henry. She found that her father, the mountain who had always sheltered her, had silently condoned, even approved of her mother's actions. In that instant, her world crumbled. Janice swayed and took a step back. Mom, Dad, you must be joking. No matter how powerful Alex is, he can't decide our fate with a single sentence. What are you so afraid of? She had been spoiled for too long. She didn't understand that when selfish people are threatened, they will sacrifice anything to protect their own interests. In the end, amidst Janice's dazed confusion, I accepted the apologies from all three of them. Watching their subservient expressions, I suddenly felt that it was all so meaningless. Seeing through it, picking it up, and letting it go, it all happened in an instant. I reached out and tugged on Alex's sleeve. I whispered, Alex, let's go home. Before leaving the Jiang house, I looked back one last time. Not out of longing, but because I don't have a home anymore. In the speeding car, Alex and I sat side by side. His expression was still cold, tinged with an unreadable anger. So now you remember you want to come home with me? I lowered my head. So, you knew what they were like all along? Is that why you were disappointed that I still cared about them giving birth to me? Alex's voice was as hard as ice. You don't trust me, and you don't listen. Stella. The ice instantly melted into water. Alex's soft fingertips frantically brushed across my cheek. He said, flustered, why are you crying? Don't cry. I'm not really mad. I sobbed, crying even harder. Of course I know you're not mad. Otherwise, why would you have worried about me and followed me here? I'm mad at myself, but, Alex. I looked him straight in the eye and said from the bottom of my heart, I'm so glad you didn't let them harm your interests. That's really great. Alex's hand, which was wiping my tears, paused. Then it quickly started moving again. His voice became muffled. You haven't changed at all. Even when you're sad, you pretend to talk about something else so no one will notice. Only your tears don't lie. I wiped my face haphazardly. Nonsense. How would you know? I'm not like that. Alex caught my hand and stroked my face, which I had rubbed red. He fell silent. After I had a good cry and let out my emotions, I felt a little lighter. Seeing Alex's unusually silent and worried expression, I half joked, why did you stop talking? Are you afraid I'll discover your true identity? That you're actually a cat? He suddenly sat bolt upright, like a soldier at inspection, and I couldn't tell if he was scared or just nervous. I held his hand. Just kidding. Did I scare you? The reason I said that is because you're not the only one who's seen me like this. He was a cat named Comet. The most beautiful cat in the world. Alex's tense, almost hostile posture strangely relaxed. The night view outside the window was beautiful. A sea of lights from thousands of homes. In my silence, Alex spoke at an inopportune moment. You can tell me about your past. You look like you really need someone to talk to. Alex looked down. I'm free anyway. You're my legal wife, I'm happy to listen. Thump thump. Thump thump. It was the heartbeat I had always suppressed in the name of my own inferiority. It said, trust him. You've walked a very long road alone. You're too tired, too lonely. He's trustworthy. And you're willing to trust him, aren't you? I whispered, yes. It was strange. I just really wanted to believe him at this moment. There are parts of my past I've never gotten over. Otherwise, why would I have specifically asked around about what they wanted recently before going to the Jiang family's house? I had never gotten over it. The most prominent feature of Stella's childhood memories was the dense, suffocating cluster of low-rise tenement buildings. Looking up, you couldn't see the sky. Looking down, all you saw was grime and trash on the ground. The people living here were a mixed bag, but thankfully, there were some kind neighbors. Thanks to their help, Stella managed to grow up, eating sporadically, and finished her schooling through scholarships, part-time work, and scattered acts of kindness. All because she had a gambling-addicted father and a mother who had run off. Although now it seemed they were likely Janice's biological parents, the suffering Stella endured was real. It wasn't just the hardship of poverty, hunger, and a lack of dignity. It was also the leering, suggestive glances from some of the local troublemakers as she grew older. She was beautiful. So beautiful that, like the cat she would later own, she didn't seem to belong in this narrow, greasy tenement complex. Someone chronically malnourished should have been sallow and thin. But she possessed a delicate, willow-like grace. Fortunately, this was a society with laws, and a few kind aunties would pretend to be buying or washing vegetables, loitering not too far from her, chatting about daily life, and chasing away those with ill intentions. They also dispelled Stella's fear. Perhaps it was those very aunties, the ones who went to the market 5 times a day for 3 meals and followed her work route, that preserved a sliver of belief in the fundamental goodness of people in her otherwise gray life. This continued until Stella was 15. That year, she was in her last year of middle school, just about to take her final exams. Her greedy, gambling, alcoholic father, having lost all his money, ran back home. The first thing he saw was Stella, sitting at her desk, studying diligently. Even the dim, kitchen grease-caked incandescent light couldn't hide her beauty. For a gambler who had lost everything, selling his daughter, or making her do something, was not out of the ordinary. But first, he had to cultivate some affection. Stella was not a heartless person. There was a soft side to her personality. For instance, she always held on to a sliver of hope for family affection. For half of the winter break, her gambler father took her out to play, to eat good food, to buy new clothes. At night, he acted like a real father, carefully turning on the small space heater for his child and tucking her in. It was the kind of parental love Stella had dreamed of, the kind she had only heard about from her classmates. She was still young. She thought her father had seen the error of his ways and would live a normal, peaceful life like any other father. On the day of the Lantern Festival, her father took her to an expensive seafood buffet. Both father and daughter ate a lot, staying out late. To get home sooner, they decided to take a shortcut through a small alley. Everything seemed so natural. Stella naively patted her stomach, full of sea urchin, salmon, and snapper, naively believing her happiness was about to begin. Then, her hopeful father pushed her into the hands of 2 men with scarred faces. And then, for a mere $10,000, she was haggled over, treated like a commodity. Little Stella thought, so I'm only worth $10,000. Just as she lowered her head in resignation, a cat's meow rang out. It was followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. Those aunties, led by a golden cat, had come. Stella's memory of that day is blurry. She vaguely remembers the traffickers and her father getting their faces scratched up and being sent to the police station. What she remembers most vividly, aside from the lead auntie, Ms. Lana, who was brandishing a spatula indignantly, was that magnificent cat. Its fluffy head was held high, possessing an almost human-like intelligence as it sat outside the police station, waiting for her to come out. The red and blue lights of the police car illuminated it. Its face seemed to say, "This kitty is a hero. I do good deeds without seeking fame. No need to thank me." It wasn't a stray from this area. Stella, as if possessed, reached out her hand. "Little cat, I don't have a home anymore. Will you come home with me and be my family?" The hero cat tilted its head. Its large, amber eyes blinked. Its little paws took 2 steps forward. It sniffed the girl's hand. Then, it reluctantly rested its head on the hand of this girl who looked so incredibly sad. Meow. Humans like this. Kitty will let you pet me. Don't be sad anymore. I looked at Alex, who was staring blankly into space, as if completely engrossed in my story. I named him Comet. We met on the Lantern Festival. So poetic, right? Alex stared at me, his pupils constricting slightly. He looked pained, but also determined. What happened after? I closed my eyes. My voice was low. Later, Ms. Lana, the one who led the group, often brought me food. She was a good person. For years ago, when I was a sophomore in high school, she got sick and didn't have money for treatment. It was a curable disease, but she went back to the tenement to wait for death. Ms. Lana was so strong. When she swung her spatula, even those young thugs were afraid of her. When she passed, she was nothing but a bag of bones. I secretly dropped out of school to work and save up for her medical bills. She yelled and scolded me. She couldn't even lift her spatula anymore, but she held on long enough to send me back to school, making me promise to finish. She called me a foolish girl. I always thought my real mother should have been like that. People who lack love are just foolish, always fantasizing that they too can be loved. I miss Ms. Lana so much. Later, I helped her son start a business and helped her disabled husband find a job. They were grateful, but they weren't Ms. Lana. If the Jiang family had found me sooner, if I had money sooner. My nails dug into my palms unconsciously, as I finally admitted to the anger that burned me day and night. Thank goodness I had Comet. He was with me for many years, through the hardest and saddest times. But I wasn't a good owner. The year I graduated from high school, he started vomiting all the time, his body was always cold, and his fur was falling out in clumps. I took him to so many vets, spent so much money, but they couldn't find anything wrong with him. I used up all my savings, didn't even leave money for college. I thought about not going to college, but I should have known. My Comet was so smart. I just told him, I said I wasn't going to college, that I would stay with him forever. I said, if he died, I would have nothing left to live for, that I wouldn't live anymore. And then I could never find him again. The anger gradually subsided, leaving only a calm despair. I recounted the story, but my body couldn't stop trembling. One evening, I came back from work, and I couldn't find him anywhere. He understood. He chose to leave me. But I had just earned some money from a part-time job, and I was going to take him to another city to see a specialist. Alex pulled me into his arms. Don't say any more. He repeated, don't say any more. Don't think about it. You loved him, and he loved you too. Back then, you were both trying to make the best choice for each other, weren't you? You're doing well now. He would be happy. Ms. Lana would be happy too. I managed a smile that was uglier than crying. Yeah. That's why I tried my best to live. I couldn't betray his determination. Alex changed the subject, looking away awkwardly. Besides, maybe he didn't die. A cat can only think so much. He probably doesn't understand the principle of a snake shedding its skin. Every time it sheds its skin, it becomes stronger. I was dazed. Huh? How can you compare a cat to a snake? In that instant, my nose twitched. I sniffed the scent on Alex. He never wore cologne. And he hated it when other people wore it. A strong fragrance would send him into a rage. He always had a faint, grassy scent. The ridicule from the netizens. After the Lantern Festival, as spring began, all of Alex's strange behaviors. The burning body temperature. The insatiable demands. The purring whenever he was touched, making him extra clingy. I was too close to see it. A thought sprang up, unstoppable. It's too absurd. How could I possibly think that Alex wasn't human? The thin layer of ice between Alex and me, the one that always made things feel like I was looking at him through a fog, completely shattered. Not a single shard remained. I guess we caught up with the trend and started our own marriage first, love later story. My days were sweet. And the Jiang family went bankrupt. A crying Janice was expelled from her university after her funds were cut off. The Jiang family ended up in the tenements, bickering over trivial matters day in and day out. I heard that Janice, unwilling to sell her jewelry, took the money and ran to join her best friend in some Southeast Asian peninsula, a friend who was willing to help her make a comeback. There was no news of her after that. As for Henry and Cynthia, they started fighting over money and were now getting a divorce in their old age. One had chronic illnesses from a life of luxury and couldn't afford treatment. The other was too proud to handle the fall from grace and was constantly in and out of the hospital, sick with no signs of recovery. The life of the poor that they had looked down upon would now torment them for the rest of their days. With old and new scores settled, other things became more prominent. I started to consciously observe Alex. And what an observation it was. It was a classic case of not seeing what's right in front of you. Let's assume Alex really was a cat. I raised my hand and scratched Alex's chin. Alex grunted. I let out a soft moan as well. Alex's hand was still burning hot. Caught off guard by the surprise attack, a very displeased Alex said faintly, "What are you doing? You were just spacing out. Who were you thinking about? He's not even pretending anymore." Not asking what I was thinking, but who? He's not talking about being considerate of me anymore, completely disregarding our previously agreed upon schedule. Reddit said that cats have a hard time controlling themselves when they're in heat. I zoned out again. I was thinking about you. Alex sneered. He looked down at me. It seems I've been too restrained lately. I soon understood what he meant by too restrained. Literally. The entire night, until the sky turned a fish belly white. I was seeing stars for the third time. I'm gonna die. I'm really gonna die. My pupils were about to lose focus in that way. After some painful reflection, I sat up. Although my recent tendency to bizarrely associate Alex with a cat had led me to be distracted and perfunctory at times, which was my fault. That was no excuse for him to become more and more excessive. I was determined to create a harmonious bedroom atmosphere, with set menus, cooking times, and portion sizes. I said to Alex tactfully, I've thought about this very seriously. For the sake of our health, from now on, let's stick to our previous agreement. Twice a week, and we'll add a new rule, no overnighters. Alex, who had been contentedly tucking his paws in, looked at me in disbelief. I grabbed his hand and said in a high-pitched voice, Honey, I'm just thinking about your health. They say that after 25, men can only chat. It's because they squandered their energy when they were younger. Alex stared at me, dumbfounded. The next second, his eyes suddenly reddened, and he glared at me as if I had committed an unforgivable crime. His voice suddenly rose. You think I'm old? I quickly reached out to stroke his hair. Don't get excited. I'm just looking out for you. Look, you're getting all fluffy from being so mad, huh? My brain shut down for a second. The texture under my hand was so familiar. It was a liveliness I couldn't even reach in my dreams. The inner and top parts of the ear were thin and warm. Because the person beneath me hadn't noticed yet, they were standing up straight and cute against my fingertips. The soft fur on the outside tickled my palm. They were a pair of very alert, very perky, fluffy ears. Comet Alex. Even though I had suspected it, I froze on the spot. Then, my whole body began to tremble violently. Alex's majestic expression froze. He subconsciously reached for the top of his head. Like a rusty gear, he creaked as he slowly lowered his head to look at me. Alex belatedly realized what he had exposed. His eyes grew redder, and the cat ears that had popped out in his excitement flattened back frantically. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but seeing my petrified expression, he went on the offensive, crying out in grief. Human, so when you said you liked your kitty and would do anything for your kitty, were you lying? I spent a full hour placating Alex. No. Not Alex. Comet. Alex wasn't that hard to please. He had the burden of his domineering, cold CEO persona to maintain. But Comet, the cat who shamelessly showed his temper in front of the person he was closest to, was another story. He was proud, awkward, and often did nasty things like dipping his furry paws in my drinking glass. After I repeatedly reassured him and signed a series of unequal bedroom treaties, Alex calmed down and briefly explained his origins. But he still looked unhappy. Even though he had always been so resistant to me saying I was too tired and didn't want him. Why? Shouldn't our reunion be a happy one? At least my heart rate, upon getting him back, had spiked to a level that required a defibrillator. A thought suddenly struck me. So, Comet has been holding a grudge against me? That day before the Lantern Festival, you were actually trying to say that I should have figured it out myself, recognized you, otherwise it meant I don't love you? Alex's cat eyes lit up. I struggled to make a final stand. But this is Crossspecies. So what? Alex's eyes turned red again. He shouted, they all say that if you love someone, you'd recognize them even if they were turned to ashes. Those stupid humans can recognize each other, so why can't you? You clearly don't love me. When you were holding your kitty in your arms, petting me from head to toe, you said I was your most beloved baby. But as soon as your kitty gets a new look, you don't recognize me anymore. Why can't your kitty be mad? Why can't your kitty give you the cold shoulder for a year? Alex's voice got louder and louder, until finally, he got emotional again and started crying like a boiling kettle. I was too tired to argue. Physically, I don't think you've given me the cold shoulder this year. Alex said. I looked up strategies. This type of CEO is popular right now. It's called hate, and it captures a woman's heart, making her easily fall into a sea of love and hate. He peeked at me from the corner of his eye and added defensively, isn't it good to fall for your kitty? I looked at Alex, who was crying pitifully but still arguing his case. I suddenly realized that no amount of arguing would work. A proud and self-important kitty never needs an argument. A kitty needs a hug. I hugged him, relying on him completely. I said, Comet, actually, you just wanted to say that you regret not being good at expressing yourself, for not telling me from the beginning that you didn't die, but became a person, right? When a cat gets extra grumpy, it's often to hide its insecurity. Maybe because you were afraid I'd think you were a freak, a monster, or something? Alex's ears were practically flattened against the back of his head. He pretended not to care, but his amber eyes were fixed on me. How could I? You're my Comet. My silly Comet, my silly kitty. I touched the dampness on my own face. Huh. So pathetic. When I first suspected it, I had already prepared myself mentally. Stella was a grown-up now. Without Comet and Ms. Lana, she had stumbled through life and survived on her own. Don't be like that weak girl from back then, who only knew how to cry and think about dying with him. Talk to him properly, cherish every second of this reunion. I didn't want to leave any unhappiness or unresolved issues between us. But as soon as I opened my mouth, I realized I was already crying uncontrollably. My voice was choked and trembling, as soft as if I were afraid of waking from a dream. No, it's not the kitty who's silly, it's me. Comet, the Lantern Festival. It turned out I was so afraid that this was all just a beautiful dream before death. Could something this good really happen in the world? My Comet, who I thought I had lost forever. And Alex, who I didn't dare to dream of loving. Were one and the same. No. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. It was just that, by chance, that cat was Comet, and that person was Alex. My Comet was afraid I wouldn't recognize him, so he picked such an obvious name, and I still didn't get it. I'm so stupid. Alex's fluffy ears trembled as he cried. A stray hair fell on my nose. It was wet with tears. So itchy. It wasn't a dream. It really wasn't a dream. Alex's carefully constructed composure, which had been holding on by a thread, completely shattered. He started bawling with me. Kitty is stupid. Kitty was throwing a tantrum. I cried and said, you're not stupid. You weren't throwing a tantrum. You're the most adaptable kitty ever. My Comet looked for me for so long. A person who isn't superstitious even hired a spiritual master and staged a whole play just to bring me home. When Alex was briefly explaining earlier, he mentioned that when he was looking for the master, he was even conned into buying a bunch of good luck charms for love, symbolizing eternal togetherness. They were all stashed in the box where he hid his toys from me. He wasn't a superstitious person. But love is a timely superstition. Alex's tears hung on his cheeks. He was no longer the majestic, beautiful cat from the tenements. He even looked a little pathetic and comical. I was crying and laughing at the same time. Comet, you must have been so sad this past year when I didn't recognize you. Did you think I had forgotten you? Alex's tears gradually stopped. He held me close. He said, I was sad, but your kitty is a coward too. Alex was a coward. He was scared that Stella would be afraid of his non-human identity. Scared that Stella would distance herself from him. Even more scared that Stella wouldn't like his human form. A very confident, yet very insecure, little cat. The only thing Alex was sure of was this, but I never thought you would forget me. You wouldn't. I sniffled, looking at this proud cat. What if I had forgotten? Alex whispered, human, then your kitty would just have to tell you the story of how I chose you from the crowd all over again. But it's a very long story. May I have the rest of your life to tell it? That would be a very, very long story indeed. From my 16th year until long, long after. I said sullenly, you left me on read and then changed the subject. Alex paused. He squeezed out a sticky sentence from between his teeth, his newly reappeared fluffy tail wagging wildly. He said, all right, human. Your kitty fell in love with you the first moment I saw you. So, your kitty snatched you back from the Jiang family. You're not some wild human that nobody wants. Your kitty loves you. Your kitty can tell you the story of how I chose you, over and over again. He said with certainty, you'll fall for me eventually. The sun rose in the east. Sunlight streamed through the gap in the curtains. I looked into his sparkling eyes. I couldn't help but kiss him. In the overlapping shadows, I said, of course. After all, it is an honor to be chosen, time and time again, by the great Lord Cat. Epilogue, The Lantern Festival. Alex wasn't originally named Alex. He didn't have a name, in his clan, survival of the fittest was the rule. Names were only given after reaching adulthood. Before that, they walked the world as cats, forgetting their own human nature, under the noble pretext of tempering their minds and strengthening their bodies. Actually, Alex had read the unofficial histories. It was because an ancestor had been betrayed by their human childhood sweetheart. From then on, he vowed that his descendants would not repeat the mistake of being love-struck fools. But strangely, every generation of the Liu family was full of love-struck fools. Just like the day Alex returned home. He locked himself in his bedroom for a whole month. It's unclear if he was annoyed that his own coming of age was approaching and he could no longer stay by Stella's side, or if he was angry at himself for being just a cat, foolishly clinging to the idea of not wanting to see Stella grieve over his death, and thus leaving without a word. See, a cat's brain is only so big. Alex was furious. He even pulled out a few hairs from his own tail. But what's done is done. Alex gave himself a month to awkwardly process everything, prepared his speech, and then rushed back to the tenements, full of anticipation and wild fantasies. But he was stopped. He had just reached adulthood, and his form was unstable due to the huge emotional swings. He could only stay at the Liu Corporation, stabilizing his form while keeping an eye on Stella's situation. His father, disappointed, nipped his furry ear. Those not of our kind have different hearts. If you don't listen to your elders, you'll regret it. Perfect your human form before you go looking for her. What if she's scared that you're not human? Alex stuck his neck out. She won't be. And then he obediently learned how to integrate into human society, putting on a human mask. And in his colorful life as a CEO, he successfully chose the most popular persona among girls, the cold, domineering CEO. Combined with his natural pride. Stella won't be able to resist me. 2 years was just 2 years. He was confident Stella wouldn't forget him. Well, maybe not that confident. You'll recognize me eventually, right? Alex thought smugly. First month of marriage. She didn't recognize him. Half a year. She didn't recognize him. Almost a year. Still didn't recognize him. His own maturation period, his heat, had arrived. Alex was a little unwilling to accept it. But he didn't dare tell her directly. Like just saying, hey, I'm your cat. Or, I was so stupid back then. I didn't know I wasn't dying, I was actually turning into a person. I missed you so much, so I racked my brain to make you my wife. That was all too shocking. And a little embarrassing for a kitty. Alex was unwilling to admit that he was afraid Stella only liked cats. And not him, her husband from an arranged marriage. Or that she would think he was a freak. All these fears, this unwillingness, prompted him to use his heat as an excuse to once again become the little comet who would occasionally roll over and show his belly in her arms. That was a happy time, wasn't it? Yes, it was very happy. She leaned against my chest, her eyes closed in contentment. If you hadn't put on that old school, cold CEO persona, we might have been even happier. Don't you think, Mr. Turns Out I'm a CEO? At least it wouldn't have made her so hesitant to like me. Hearing that name, an embarrassed look crossed my face, and I couldn't help but scratch the table again. I paid the price for not keeping up with the trends. But it's okay. For something as superstitious as love, it's never too late. Summer arrived. We have been together for a long time. So long that, by a normal cat's lifespan, we've spent a quarter of a life together. Thankfully. I'm not an ordinary cat. We still have a lot of time. Fire trees and silver flowers merge, the star bridge and iron locks open. Dark dust follows the horses away, the bright moon pursues my love's arrival. The moonlight from the Lantern Festival all those years ago shone through the tenements, traveled to the Jiang house, and then to the Lu house. It finally caught up to the chapter that belongs exclusively to Stella and Alex.